And the reason it's not exactly clear has to do with these studies, which were done essentially from 52 through the better part of the 50s, at least I think through 56 and possibly 58 at Rand. And they were not just studies with adjectives and adverbs, which is sort of the currency of Washington. No, there were numbers associated with this. There's a lot of operations research, and a lot of these people hailed from the operation research corps that studied air defenses and aircraft damage during the Second World War. And the Project Air Force had a lot of those people. But essentially, what they came up to study was just exactly what do you need to have in the way of a force so that it can survive a first strike. And it isn't that easy. I think I'm curious, I suppose I should ask a question here of sorts. Let's see here. Does anybody know what the original tasking was to Albert Wohlstetter from the Air Force to do the bomber study? What was it originally focused on? Can anyone say? That would turn on whether anyone read the notes. Now, it could be no one read the notes, but I'm hoping for statistical. Okay, Ms. Domanovich, could you speak up? Hello?
Hi there, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, good. Sorry, I'm just in the office with a colleague. As I recall, the original purpose was to study where SAC bases should be located, such as to optimize expenditures on things like fuel, local transportation, laundry services, food, things like that, to assess where you should place them, because of course the other concerns that the SAC commanders had in mind were how close you would need to be to, strike the enemy efficiently.
Yeah, they wanted to get as close as they could, but they wanted to have creature comforts. And they didn't want to lose money, being too far away from McDonald's. I mean, I'm laughing because it's just amazing how optimistic Curtis LeMay's outfit was. I mean, this is so they tasked Rand. Could you tell us how close we can get before it becomes cost ineffective to have all those conveniences? And I think Woolstetter, when he first got this assignment, was not happy with it, and he thought it was the wrong question. Let's go just a little forward, and we'll look at this slide repeatedly, I think, in the class. Go forward again. Go forward again. Yes. Well, unluckily or luckily, depending on how you look at it, right about the time he was being asked to, optimize for Curtis LeMay's concerns, something happened that was really quite chilling. There was a warning of a tornado that came to Carswell Air Force Base, where 2/3 of our SAC bomber force was. And they had, I think they had at least an hour or two of warning. And Curtis LeMay had told his commanders that they should be ready on warning to be able to, be off the runway within 30 minutes. Not a single one of these things took off, even though they had, more than an hour of warning. And 2/3 of the force was put out of action. Now, these things some of them were repaired, so we didn't, lose the entire force. But this was quite a jolt. And it enabled, I think, Woolstetter to change the tasking, to ask the question, essentially, what do we need to do to survive a first strike? What do we need to have an effective deterrent force? In other words, instead of being optimistic, what does deterrence look like if you're pessimistic? In particular, if you don't arrange your force quite right, it could encourage an attack, not deter an attack. If you don't arrange it and build it correctly, it could be more prone to accidents that would either disable it or start a war you didn't want to start. Um, if you didn't arrange it correctly, it might take off, but it might not reach the target, either because of air defenses or the lack of fuel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a just more serious set of questions than what he was originally tasked with. Let's take a look at the answers that he gave. Let's go back now to the first hurdle. He came up with 6 hurdles, which is kind of a classic set of hurdles that, every self-respecting nuclear amateur needs to know something about, and it usually reads. It took many years of study and lots of reports, but there was a retail version, which I asked you to read, in Foreign Affairs, called The Delicate Balance of Terror. And in there, he lays out for the public consumption these hurdles. And he did it and was allowed to do it because by then the Air Force had taken most of the recommendations. And so it was not embarrassing. If you will, this is a form of selective declassification or dissemination of information that shaped the competition with the Soviets in a useful way. All right, so what's the first hurdle? You do not want to have strategic forces that are so prone to have to be used that you have to use them or lose them. And that's roughly what, in some respects, we had with our liquid-fueled, unstable liquid-fueled medium-range systems, such as Jupiters, which had to be erected in plain sight, required access to a fuel making factory. They had to be fueled, and generally it was really difficult to defuel them. So once you fueled them, you had a certain amount of time, you really had to use them. If ever there was something that screamed, I'm getting ready to attack you, you might want to consider doing something. It would be this system. And they were not cheap. Now, what is an alternative that was developed largely because of studies done at RAND, where there were certain assumptions about how hard you could make concrete. And they went about the business of disproving that rebar was fragile. In fact, it could be made quite hard. Of course, now it can be made tens of thousands of pounds of psi harder than what these original 1960s silos are made of. In any case, more important, there was the development of solid fuel, which can be stored for many, many years and can be fired immediately. You don't have to take hours of fueling and then have to use it. They're storable, they can be fired immediately. These things being in silos meant that no one could see your intent to fire them. So they didn't draw attention like putting these missiles on the tarmac. Not only that, but you see, when you go to the unstable basing of the Jupiter, if you will, you need a lot of these things because you're probably going to lose a lot. There was some discussion in the late 50s about acquiring 10,000 Minutemen. After people at the Air Force decided to put them in silos, they came to the conclusion that, well, they only needed several hundred or 1,000 of them. Big difference. Saved a lot of money. So this is an example of stable peacetime operation. You want a force that you can afford, that doesn't encourage attack or encourage you to use them early in a conflict. Initially, the hardening of the silos made it possible for the Soviets to strike first, and we did not have to launch on warning. or launch under attack to save the missiles, because the inaccuracies of their missiles and their numbers meant so much of the force, our force, would survive that we didn't need to launch on warning. That then allowed you to do some kind of assessment as to what kind of damage you had suffered and what the appropriate counterstrike might be. Uh, that is a clear example of stable peacetime operation. Now, the problem, of course, is today the accuracy of Chinese and Russian missiles is such that anything that doesn't move and is locatable is dead meat. And that means that we do probably slouch towards launch on warning or launch under attack ourselves. Needless to say, that example has prompted, I think, the Chinese to think they need to do that. You can see we're going in the wrong direction. We might, in the course of time, have to think about making our systems less vulnerable again. So this is still a very important issue, stable peacetime operation, very important